G'day viewers, it's Phil from Phil and Jen in the Philippines. Welcome to another vlog. Normal as usual, can you subscribe, hit the thumbs up, notifications bells and comment. This one will be an interesting one. And it's my long and convoluted story about the trip to Cebu from Dumaguete to obtain my exit visa. Take these off so you don't see the reflections in the glasses. Okay, as a lot of you know, unfortunately I've got to return to Australia on some business at a very inopportune time, being close to Christmas, which means that I'll not spend Christmas with the kids and Jen, but it can't be helped, and I've got to return rather quickly. In reference to this, certain things happen, even though we have immigration here at Dumaguete. For some inexplicable reason, they can't do an exit visa here, even though they do every other possible immigration thing. And that means expats like myself on particular visas in this country before they leave, and they've been here for over a 6-month period, have to get an exit visa. It seems relatively simple on paper. The information gleaned from immigration here was that as long as it's 3 days before the day of departure, everything will be okay. The mere fact that it's a terrible encumbrance to have to travel that 300 or so kilometres to Cebu doesn't seem to come into effect, and it is what it is. As I explained beforehand, there's 3 ways to get to Cebu from Dumaguete. There is flying, of course, but this time of year they take advantage of the fact that it's close to Christmas, and the flights are not only expensive and are hugely expensive, it's also very, very difficult to get on at short notice. So I eliminated the flight situation, which left the ferry from here, which is approximately 6 hours, at a cost of 1,270 pesos each way. At 50 pesos per dollar, you can work that out in the US, and 35 pesos to the Australian dollar, you can work that out again. And then it's another 1,270 on return. The bus, however, I found was advertised as being exactly the same time, and the buses here are quite comfortable. They're a coach type air-conditioned bus, obviously having, or not obviously, but having sometimes entertainment on board, and they're quite comfortable, so I chose the bus. One, because they're more regular, and I didn't know how long I was going to stay in Cebu. So I had full intentions of vlogging my whole trip, but things happened, and possibly this trip may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as I'm concerned. And we'll start out, the first advertised bus leaves at 3 a.m. I was to leave last Wednesday, it's now Saturday morning, but one of those unheralded public holidays was Wednesday, and knowing that they take full advantage of all public holidays, I knew that nothing would be open in Cebu, so I let it go again until the Thursday. On Thursday morning, I attended the bus station at 2 o'clock in the morning to get the 3 o'clock bus. While sitting there, I was then informed that the 3 o'clock bus had broken down, and the next bus available was 5 a.m. So I waited at the bus terminal until 5 a.m. And this is where the whole trip started to go downhill. At approximately 5 a.m., just before boarding the bus, I was approached by another Westerner, which is a little bit unusual because not many Westerners usually take these buses, especially at that time of the morning. He proceeded to plonk himself down beside me. He was rather disheveled, a man of around, say, 38, 40, and he was requesting, or at least inquiring, as to whether I was American or not, which I told him no, I'm an Australian, of course. And he seemed to be in a little bit of disarray, And I then proceeded to get a long convoluted story about how he'd just been robbed. Story I've heard numerous times before. So I was waiting for the big punchline, which usually is, "Oh, buddy, can you lend me some money?" As he went on with this convoluted story about being over here for a 7-month period and having a great time for the first 3 or 4 months, and then falling into what can only be considered to be bad company, he found himself residing with 2 other Filipinos of dubious, from what I can gather from the story, character in their residence, and they proceeded to wine and dine and do God knows what for another couple of months. But I would imagine on his pension, which is social security of some description. I think he did mention it was a disability. What disability, I don't know, apart from stupidity. But anyway, he went on, and cut a long story short, he had to get out of Dodge, or he had to leave after an argument and a fight with these 2, who apparently were well connected in the Dumaguete area. Then they'd robbed him of everything he possessed. He didn't have any clothing. He didn't have any goods of any description. His supposed money was gone, and his ID, and etc., etc. You can imagine the saga that went on. He had on him a few hundred pesos, and he wanted to know if, out of the goodness of my heart, I would spot him for a bus fare to Cebu. Well, I'd heard all this before. The Cebu bus trip was around 500 pesos. I said, "Yeah, sure, pal, I'll do that for you," being an expat in supposed distress. But I haven't got anything smaller than 1,000, so I'll wait until we get on the bus. Now, this was to do one thing, and one thing only. Just to make sure that he was getting on the bus, rather than me just hand him 500 pesos. Well, he eventually got on the bus, and then proceeded to be my best friend for about 5 minutes, and incessantly talked about his woes. Because of the time, I was rather tired, and I explained to him, "Look, pal, like, I don't really want to hear this. I want to sleep as much as I can. Can you sit over the way? There's plenty of vacant seats to make it more comfortable for both of us." Well, he went over this inane story over and over again, but eventually I got him to move to the other side of the bus, and then proceeded to doze off as the bus headed towards Cebu at the cracking pace of around an average of 35 to 45 kilometres an hour. On our trip to Cebu, we get to a port where we have to, obviously being island hopping, we have to barge. The bus gets onto a barge and then travels across the water to the island of Cebu, and then we supposedly proceed from there. What had happened is, when you get onto the barge, the majority of people decamp the bus, and they sit up in the viewing section, obviously a change of scenery, and they can talk and I don't know, have a cigarette. I have no idea what they do up there, because basically I didn't get off the bus. I continued to sleep. The crossing the crossing is usually 45 minutes to get to the Isle of Cebu, and then they all file back on the bus. Then the conductor comes along and does the count. The American was nowhere to be found. And of course, everyone suggested that when the barge took off, he decamped the bus, and the conductor, doing his job correctly, then went to look for the wayward American and did a search of the barge, of which the American was not located. Seeing we're on Cebu, he then reported the missing American to the Port Authority police. No one could actually say whether he got off the barge on departure. No one saw that, but he certainly wasn't on the barge at the other end. And of course, everyone assumed that we were travelling together after they'd witnessed us having a conversation. The Port Authority police approached me, asked me questions about this American, of which I had or could furnish no answers, apart from the fact that I had met him 10 minutes before departure, and they were rather skeptical at this. And even though the conversation was partly in English and partly in Visayan, I became decidedly uncomfortable with the fact that they assumed, or they were trying to allege at one stage, that something nefarious had happened and I was in cahoots with this American chap. Fortunately, I was not the only one on the bus sleeping away for the crossing, but also one of the drivers or the conductor then suggested to police that I never decamped the bus, never got off the bus when the American got off, and that I'd slept the whole time. They seemed to lose interest at this, and they were as confounded as everybody else on the bus. But no one really officially had reported this guy missing, so they obviously said, well, until someone says something, we're not interested, and then wandered off. This unfortunately delayed the trip about an hour and a half. To answer any, I have no idea what happened to the American. I don't know if he got off before the barge left. I know he didn't have any money. We are an hour or so from Dumaguete. I don't know if he did get off, what his thoughts pattern was to get back. Maybe he waited for another Westerner to come back to see if he could obtain money. But the consensus was that he was on board when the barge left, and when it arrived, he wasn't on board. So you can draw your own conclusions to that. I don't hope to hear anything more about it, but you never know. So the trip started well. So on the bus we get, we're an hour and a half late, and we travel the 5 or 6 hours through traffic because we arrived in Cebu late afternoon rather than when we should have, which was earlier in the afternoon, and then copped the peak hour traffic, getting us to the terminal where I had to get off the bus and then take a taxi, a 40-minute taxi ride to the so-called immigration, which is located in a shopping centre. I entered the knowing full well, and this is the other thing that's annoying about this country, the hours of immigration are open till 5, but knowing that whatever possibly can go wrong in this country it will, and knowing their work ethic, I was well aware that I should have got there by 4, because the habit is that if you don't get there by 4 o'clock, they don't take any further applications of any description. Their wind down period until 5 o'clock, and you'd have to return. Well, as fortunately I did get there by about 3:45, and then proceeded to the immigration officer at Cebu, and informed him that I was there for an exit visa up from Dumaguete. He asked me when I was leaving, which was the 6th, it was now the 1st, and then suggested to me, had I booked a plane already? I said, yes, I have, which is one of the requirements according to immigration here, that I had to have a booking on an aircraft. Remember, a terrible time of the year. If unfortunately I was to cancel that booking, I would lose those funds. At worst, at best, I would have to obviously supplement another booking getting closer to Christmas with more and more money. So he was aware that I had very little choice. And then he proceeded to say, well, you've left it too late. I said, what do you mean I've left it too late? He said, oh, you need it at least 3 days before departure. And I said, well, according to me, it's now 6 days before departure. Oh, he says, no, you can't count today, and you can't count the departure day. And then there's a weekend in between, you can't count those. So there's 4 of the 6 gone, and that only leaves 2 days. And I knew exactly what was happening at the time it was happening, and then trying to keep my anger at a suppressed level, I said, well, what can I do? It's an emergency that I get home. No, he then knew that I have a booked flight. He knew the time of year. He knew how costly it was. He knew I'd travelled 7 or so hours to get there. So this put him in the driver's seat. He knew he was in a position of authority, and he decided, okay, I can do you a favor, my friend. Now, people must realize that it's 1,230 pesos, I believe, or around about that figure for the actual application. All of a sudden, there is an express service offered to me, something that is not official, and that express service would cost me 5,000 pesos and 1,000 pesos for him for arranging it. Well, I'm in a situation that I don't like to do. I could have stuck on my dig, made a fool of myself, but on the same token too, once you get yourself into a situation here with an immigration officer and you embarrass him or you make a problem for them, he has the power to be able to black ban you from the Philippines. So I'm in a no win-win situation. Actually, I tell a lie, because the first express was going to cost me 10,000 pesos. Fortunately, I'd already divided my money up into different areas, and I was only carrying around 7,000 pesos in my wallet, of which he decided, as I opened it up, to inspect. And he also glanced that I had a bank card as I'm going through my wallet, and the fee was 10,000 plus 1,000 for him. I informed him that I didn't have 10,000 pesos, that I only had 7,000 pesos, and I needed to get home. He said, well, for you, doing me a huge favour, he said 5,000 plus 1,000, which is 6,000, leaving me 1,000 pesos, not knowing that I had further money, after requesting that I go to the bank and get more money out. I informed him, I lied and said, this is not my card, this is my wife's card, and I don't know her PIN number. The suggestion was, ever so helpful, that I should call my wife and get her to wire money down, because the paperwork wouldn't be ready until 4 o'clock the following day. This means that I have to go to the expense of a room in Cebu. And I then explained to him, if I have to get a room to come back at 4 o'clock, it's going to cost even more money. And I am not going to pay him 10,000 plus 1,000. He could see I was getting a little bit irritated and decided better to make some money out of this transaction than none and cause a problem, because the irritation on my face was starting to really build. So he struck a deal. I tell you, my friend, as he kept informing me, because he's so helpful, I will get them to do it for 5,000 express and 1,000 for me. Not having any other alternative, I begrudgingly handed him the 6,000, to which of course I'd never get a receipt, and it popped into his drawer. I then had to hand over, which was probably the most worrying aspect of it, my passport, all my documentation to accompany that application. That's something I knew I had to do, but under normal circumstances I would have just waited at immigration. But now I had to gamble on the fact that I knew I was involved in illicit activity. This man was holding my passport. I had no guarantee of the paperwork. I was running short of time, and I had to take the risk that he was going to be true to his word. I was going to trust a crook. After the transaction took place, I then had to go and get a nearby accommodation, which fortunately, because I was by myself, only cost 1,700 pesos, and an additional cost, plus the meals, plus. And as you can see, I'm a little bit pissed at the whole exercise. And then reverted to that particular hotel with my thoughts. You may have realised I have been up until this point, fairly pro the Philippines. In fact, very pro the Philippines. And I believed that with enough patience, with enough understanding, one could avoid such things and I live my life, they live their lives, and they'll get out of this hump sooner or later. People ask me, do you think the Philippines will ever improve? Well, I can honestly say, after this little fiasco, probably not. Not while I had the attitude. The interesting thing is, when President Duterte was in, whether you like him or you dislike him, this did not happen, because the consequences of something like this happening, and Duterte at least realised how much money expats bring into this country. If you get enough disgruntled expats, all of a sudden that affects the economy, especially expats with vlogs. So as I said, Duterte, whether you liked him or hated him, had a handle on this type of petty corruption, which influences people such as myself. Fortunately, the following day, after yet more expense and waiting at the shopping centre, because there's nothing very much to do, and facing another 8-hour trip back to Dumaguete, and hoping and praying that the magic 4 o'clock was not going to be a signal for him to disappear into the woodwork, having a weekend come up, I finally got the phone call to say that my paperwork was ready. A sigh of relief, as you wouldn't believe, something I didn't think I had to go through. I was respectful and polite, but I was also a Western target. I went and retrieved that paperwork, and then decided to get from that particular supermarket, that particular mall, into a taxi, go back, get on a bus, and return home. Gave me a great deal of thinking on the bus trip home. And when I forgot to tell you, when I returned to pick up the paperwork, not only was he there with a smile on his face at what he achieved, he also informed me that the original 1,230 odd pesos application fee would have to be paid. That was the beginning of the end for me. So I picked up the phone and I said, I'll ring my wife, with a grin. He believed he was getting another 1,230 odd pesos because my wife was going to send me the money. And he said, she can send it to the Bank of the Philippines, or she can send it anywhere here, sir. There's plenty of ATMs, or there's Western Union, he informed me. I said, I'm not ringing her for that particular thing. My wife just happens to be the secretary of Rodrigo Duterte. And he already knew, because of my documentation, that we are originally from Mindanao. And he also realised that the area that I lived in was just down the road from Manny Pacquiao. And he also realised that, being a Westerner, that more than likely what I was saying was correct. Of course, I was bluffing on the phone as I started to ring a number. I don't know whose number it was, and put the phone to my ear. His panic on his face started to set in, because maybe this Farang, this Westerner, does have access to Mr. Duterte. He then proceeded with this look of trepidation on his face. So, oh, wait there, my friend, I'll just check on something, and wandered off and spoke to 2 other immigration officers in my line of vision. Decided to come back and say, oh, no, sorry, sir, I've made a mistake. Your 1,230 pesos, or whatever the hell it was already included in your express. So here's your paperwork, go away. So the phone call had the desired effect to save me 1,230 pesos. Now, you might be asking, why didn't I ask for all the money back if I was going to the bluff? The money had gone the day before. Certainly, these people wouldn't have been carrying the equivalent of 6,000 pesos to return to me. So, best let sleeping dogs lie. But on the way back, having plenty of time to think, in rather a depressive manner, I thought I'd speak to my wife as I arrived here at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we sat until the early hours discussing our future. And what we've decided to do, because, as I said, I think it's the straw that broke the camel's back, I will get my wife to come out to Australia, to get her to look at the country, to get her to acclimatise herself to this. And there's a great possibility we probably, more than likely, won't be returning to the Philippines. It's, again, an expensive exercise, because I have to bring my kids out and whatever. I've spent a great deal of money in this country over the years, but it's only with a great deal of disappointment that I actually say this, because it's something you can't avoid. It's here on a day-to-day basis. And even I, with my optimism, with my experience, even I'm getting tired of it. I don't need it. I'm getting older. I'm getting crankier. And how I held my tongue and stayed off the blacklist with this particular official is beyond me. And this is only one thing that will repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself in different formats for as long as I'm here and for as long as I'm a foreigner, whether I get permanent residency or not. And I don't think in my old age I'm prepared to put up with this. So that's the tale of woe. Because I had so much going on, I didn't bother about vlogging. I didn't do anything that, apart from try to get through this disastrous fiasco in a positive way. I did get my exit clearance, but even with the exit clearance, you know, I don't know if it's a real document. I don't know if it's made up by the little cronies there. I don't know if it'll pass the muster when I go through. I don't know a million things. So even now, until the day I leave, you know, I'm walking on eggshells, whether or not, you know, I get to Manila after spending another lot of money and staying between flights of 4 or 5 hours, getting to immigration there. It's quite possible, and it's happened many times, where they don't accept the paperwork, and then that opens another can of worms. So I think I'm getting too old for this. So a word of precautionary warning. That's the intention. I still intend to vlog. Maybe this is just a bad day. I've had a lousy couple of days. Maybe I'll, well, maybe, who knows. But anyway, I thought you'd be interested in that. I'll go back to normal vlogging probably this afternoon. I haven't vlogged for 2 days, which is unusual for me. I wish everybody well. I'll vlog this afternoon on hopefully a happier subject, and we'll see how it happens, or how it pans out. This is Phil in the Philippines, from Phil and Jen in the Philippines. Guys, subscribe, hit the bell, hit the notifications, share if you will. You know, we'll see you in the next vlog. Cheers.